So my name is Ola Bankole. I'm head of sustainability for London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine, and also Birkbeck, University of London, and SOAS, University of London. And I've been involved in implementing carbon management plans, several in the past, and also implementing net zero action plans for three organizations. And one of the things that we know is that most organizations are not yet at their target date yet. That's if they have a net zero action plan target itself. So most of them will be working to reach it. But what we want to do is we want to position ourselves so that we adopt a posture that takes us beyond net zero target. Now, why are we talking about going beyond the net zero target? Essentially, the journey is the most important thing. The journey is more important than the destination. The destination, in all reality, does not exist. So the reason for the destination is to do a test run so that the day after you reach your target, the week after you reach your target, and the years following those targets becomes normal for us in terms of sustaining the momentum that we've built up. So what we see sometimes in government policies and how they change and things move around is um, very confusing. So some of the announcements that was made last year regarding net zero, in itself, it's they're saying yes, we didn't change the target, but we they didn't say that, but they definitely watered it down. And again, it's the journey that's been impacted. So sometimes the destination is only validated by the journey. So I'm going to just go into some of the elements of my talk today. And you'll see some matrix references there. Um, so we'll start with the why. We all know what the why is. We all know about how and why we're doing this. So we want to go into that really briefly. And then the taking of the red pill and being able to get into the weeds of what our organization's mission is. And then we look at purpose, people, process, and how that can add to our journey towards net zero. Then we want to talk about offsetting. People don't want to talk about it, but we have to talk about it. Um, targets and the way of life. So those are things that we're going to hit really quickly. Now, in terms of how we start off, of course, we know it's a good thing to do. We know it's good for business, it's good for reputation. It's also good um, for the planet that we hit net zero. And everyone will agree to all of that. And there is also the groundswell of work that's been done across different areas within organizations where well meaning people build up the structures and networks within their organization such that they're able to push things forward by themselves. But unfortunately, that only gets you up to a certain level. And unless you start to do the heavy lifting that includes the structural or systemic changes, the holistic momentum of change will not actually happen. So the personality driven element, which is the bottom up, can only sustain for as long as the most influential people within an organization are in the organization. But we need something a lot more robust than that. Now, if you're able to somehow convince management to take the red pill and to go deep down into the weeds of it, what you have to start the conversation with is not about let's hit this target, but let's get on a journey. So it's the journey that has to be the focus, really, because we are looking, remember, looking beyond net zero. So the pitch to management is not about let's achieve this target, let's build up steam so that we can sustain the target. Now, one of the things that needs to be part of the consideration for all of this is to understand the identity of our organization and somehow try to redefine it as well. So our organization would need to um, try and decide what it wants to be when it grows up. So you have purpose and you have mission, and you have to be able to marry the purpose and mission together and communicate that and socialize that to your people and your stakeholders. And also build around that a process that would allow for um, the continual perpetuation of what you've cobbled together. So an organization must have its own deliverables. It must have its own um, aim for existing. Then it must also be able to engage its stakeholders and its people and build systems around it, processes that allows that to continue. Remember, we spoke about the um, the fact that we don't want it to be a personality-driven thing. It has to be mission-driven. So the green champions and the sustainability champions are fine, are great, but to slay the beast that we want to slay, we need the structural changes. And that's where all of that knits together. Talking about purpose, people, process, in terms of how behavior change and structural change needs to realign, these three things, I believe, needs to feature very, very strongly. And that includes the policies, procedures, and the processes that we put in place and protocols such that the governance around them are really airtight. They have fangs, not just teeth. They have fangs. So you want to build that base wherein it will thrive, and then you want to understand your value chain and use your value chain to drive change. So effectively, that is your supply chain included in that. And what is going to happen in future, and which everybody needs to position themselves for, is that there will be alliances upstream to where you get your services and your supplies from as a business, where the your delivery partners are coming to you to invest in their process to make sure that you are getting a lower carbon product or service at the other end. So that's part of engaging up and down your supply chain. So there will be that need for you to delve into the weeds of what is coming into your orbit as an organization and how you can influence the carbon, embodied carbon that comes with it. So that is a very critical part, and you can define what that looks like for you as an organization. And also the infrastructure that needs to come into play to help you with that also needs to be built and redefined and reformed. Now, not just physical infrastructure, that's important, but also the non-physical infrastructure. And that includes essentially the culture and the mobilization that you're able to generate from within your organization. So your organization has to be a living organism on its own that is able to self-perpetuate, and you have to create the conditions for that. Now, I did a bit of a guesstimate based on my sector in terms of higher education sector, etc. And the amount of effort and resource that you're going to need and the uh, emissions reduction that you can achieve through that can be up to 70%. So you can achieve up to 70% of your reduction through all of these processes, including your supply and value chain, including policies and processes, including infrastructure. It can get you 30%, 70% towards your target. But there is that 30% that's left. So what are you going to do about the 30%? And how does that, if you had a 2030 target, how would you get to your emissions target? So you have 70% reduction achieved. That's A. B is the question, what do you do? Because you need A plus B to get to net zero. Now, this is when we start to talk about that pesky issue called carbon offsetting. Now, it has to be talked about because it's part of the solution. Now, my thoughts around this is that we know that there is no net in zero without compensating for emissions that you can't shift from somewhere else. So that has to be a grown-up conversation that we need to have. So if we agree that this forms the basis for part of the journey to net zero, then it's not a question about whether we do offsetting, it's about the quality of offsets. Now, things that you have to bear in mind with that is the veracity, how true is it, how real is it, and also the impact. Is it delivering change? And for me, the kind of offsets that I would prefer are carbon um, avoidance offsets and nature-based carbon removal offsets, as opposed to the mostly technologically driven ones. And the reason is because what supports sustainable development the most is development that changes how the trajectory of how you live, how you do things. But if you inject technological solutions to solve your problems every time, you wouldn't have learned anything. So in terms of the ones that I think we need to look at, it will be those ones that encourage behavior change and culture change. If you think about it, most of the southern hemisphere, the global south as it were, that's where the biggest population is. And they have more of the development to do. So they still have room to grow. What we don't want is for them to follow the same growth trajectory that we have in the West. We want them to follow a different trajectory that is more imbibing more of the culture change and sustainable development ethos. And that, I think, is going to be a key aspect because we need them to be able to get to the finishing line when it comes to net zero. By the way, there is no finishing line. Um, as I said, destination does not exist. So that's the foundational elements that I think we need to think about when we're talking about carbon offsets. And there are some guardrails that we need to be mindful of. One, you're only offsetting for unavoidable residual emissions, not a substitute for doing the hard work of reducing your emissions. So you have to lead with the work that you need to do and not take shortcuts. Secondly, and that leads to the second point, it has to be ethically priced to reflect the true cost of carbon, really. And if you throw money at it, if you if it's cheap and cheerful and something that you can afford and don't have to change anything, it will not work. Can't remember who said this, but I think it's probably Lord Stern, who said climate change is a market failure because we have failed in being able to ascribe a tangible enough, significant enough value to carbon. We have not monetized it. We have not put value on it. And if you go for the cheap and cheerful, you will not have that impetus to change. You need to have a scenario where you step back, think things through, know what you can afford, know what you need to build into your business as your sustainability drive. Then the validation of the carbon credits has to be through proven methodologies. There are so many different types out there for carbon credits. It's ridiculous. It's like the Wild West. So you have to be very deliberate about the ones that you pick. I have heard people say to me, "Oh, I can't go with that methodology. It's too rigorous." So yes, that's the one you need to go with. So those are some of the benchmarks that you set, and so those are some of the thinking that needs to come into play when you're considering all of these things. Then, as I said, I think net zero is not a point in time. It has to be a way of life. It has to be how we position ourselves beyond reaching the targets, beyond that target goal itself. The destination does not exist. It's about the journey. And I'll also point out a couple of other things. The carbon reduction and low environmental impact as a culture, as a way of life, is what we need to embed from the start through senior management engagement and asking them to commit to the journey, not just to a target, but to the journey, and continually reducing emissions reductions through planning and programming. So we are planning everything in to run through, because if you have that mindset, for example, if you're going for a long weekend, you know what to pack and you know how you pack your bags. If you're going for a 3 weeks holiday to Alaska, you know what to pack. It won't be the same. So that's the same mentality as to if you have a target and if you're preparing for a long haul journey. And that's where we're going with this. And also, we have to continually reduce the need for offsetting. And the way to do that, I think I touched on it earlier, is investing in our supply chain and value chain such that we are anticipating and preempting and reducing the upstream emissions that's coming our way. That's going to be more and more what you see in future, where different organizations are forming networks because they share services and products such that they can interact with each other and be able to help each other to have a low carbon service and product.